There has been a debate going around college football for quite some time as to which school earns the nickname DBU. There are definitely a couple of options, but I think by far the best program has to be LSU. The subject of today's video was supposed to be the next great Tigers defensive back. He was going to follow in the footsteps of players such as Patrick Peterson, Eric Reed, Jamal Adams, Tre'Davious White, Derek Stingley, and Grant Delpit, just to name a few of them. LSU has so many players who've gone into the NFL at that position, but the subject of today's video was supposed to be in that elite tier. At one point, he was ranked as the #1 recruit in his high school class, was seen as one of the best cornerback prospects of all time, and was expected to be a pro. Unfortunately, his college career was a whirlwind. He didn't even get drafted, and didn't have the impact many thought he'd have in the NFL, but he is still going, and his career is not over yet. And in today's video, I want to talk about his story, go through what happened at LSU, and what has happened to him since he's gotten off to the NFL. But before we get started, be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new to the channel, let me know what player I should do a what happened to video on next, and turn on notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now, let's go ahead and get started. So, you're probably wondering who the subject of today's video is, and it is none other than former LSU corner Kevin Toliver II. But in order to understand what went wrong for Toliver, we first need to go back in time. Before he was the #1 recruit in the country, Kevin grew up in the Sunshine State and was a natural football player early on. His Pee Wee coach said, quote, "When he was little, he would play tight end, running back, and linebacker. He was definitely a hitter in Pee Wee, and he was just a regular-sized kid who always gave it 100%. His dad also coached football at the time and said he knew that his son would be an athlete at only 5 years old. He said they put him in t-ball, basketball, and flag football, and one day he looked at his wife and said, 'I think we have an athlete on our hands,' and football was his favorite sport. After a couple of years, he would blossom physically and was also super coachable, so he was set to take off when he got to high school. He would arrive at Trinity Christian Academy in Jacksonville as a freshman, and the staff knew early on he was special. His head coach said, quote, "He played for us a lot as a 9th grader. In fact, he started as a true freshman. We knew immediately he had what it took to play at the next level." Many other schools knew that as well, as he was actually offered by LSU as a freshman, and it was definitely a dream of his to play there. Because of all the D1 talent on the team, the Tigers also took a look at him, and he said, quote, "Growing up, I wanted to be part of LSU and DBU. Watching them growing up, I just knew once I got that offer, I was going there." He ended up committing to the Tigers as a sophomore in high school, but why did he love the Tigers so much? Well, for one, his parents were from the New Orleans area, and his second cousin was a guy by the name of Terrence Toliver. If you're an LSU or SEC fan, you probably remember that name, as he played wide receiver for the Tigers back in the day. While at Trinity, honestly, Toliver kind of had underwhelming stats. He had 36 tackles, 8 pass breakups, and 2 interceptions, but was such a talented athlete and had so much potential that the stats really didn't matter, plus other teams didn't throw the ball near him. He was such a good athlete that he played both Wildcat quarterback and DB, and schools all over the country wanted him. That was despite him being an LSU commit since November of his sophomore year, but he would eventually take all 5 of his official visits in the fall of his senior year. He would visit other programs such as Auburn, Ohio State, UCLA, and Virginia Tech, and then of course LSU. There was one scary moment during his senior year that could have changed it all, as in a scary play, he would hyperextend his knee against IMG, and this happened on national television. Thankfully, it wasn't a huge deal, and his ligaments were not in that bad of a shape, so he could come back and focus on his next step in life, where he would play college football. After having over 40 Power 5 offers, Toliver decided he was going to stay committed to Coach Les Miles and sign with the LSU Tigers. He said, quote, "I was locked ever since I committed." He ended up saying that after visiting a ton of schools, and maybe he just did that to enjoy the process because it probably was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. As I said earlier, he didn't have great on-the-field production, so why was he rated so high? Well, let's first start with the one negative in his game. The one major concern for his style was his lack of takeaways. He only had 2 interceptions in his sophomore and junior year combined, which was definitely concerning. Sure, quarterbacks on opposing teams rarely threw him the ball, but more production was needed from him if he wanted to be a star in college and eventually play on Sundays. Other than that, he was seen as a star corner in a safety's body, and he was likely going to easily translate to the next level. His goal was obviously to play on Sundays, and while in high school, he was already making friends with players in the NFL. Later on in his high school career, he contacted Cecil Shorts III. He was a wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the two began to work out together. Cecil told the media he was surprised to hear such a request from a high school player, but the two ended up becoming close, and Toliver also became friends with Jaguars cornerback Will Blackman and receiver Mike Brown. This would help him out a lot, and he was a consensus 5-star recruit, according to pretty much every national recruiting outlet, and the 24/7 Composite at one point had him listed as the #1 player in the country. One scout said he was special and would be the next great LSU defensive back. He said, quote, "Toliver's blend of size and speed are attributes that aren't always easy to see in top-flight defensive backs. As it stands now, LSU looks to mold Toliver in the way they did with former NFL first-rounders such as Morris Claiborne and Patrick Peterson." The entire consensus around this guy was that he was going to be a stud, and according to 24/7 Sports, Toliver was a 5-star recruit, the number 2 corner, and the 9th best player in the class of 2015. So how would the 5-star end up doing in Baton Rouge? When he arrived at LSU, a Bleacher Report writer made a prediction. He said that Toliver would not be redshirted, would be a freshman All-American, and would have at least 2 All-SEC appearances before going to the NFL after his junior year. How would that statement end up lining up? Well, Toliver had a pretty interesting career. He ended up starting 8 games his freshman season, but still managed to finish with 35 tackles and 1 interception. The obvious potential was there, and going into his sophomore year, he was expected to get even better. He was starting alongside All-American corner Tre'Davious White, but unfortunately, a couple bad things would happen to him. 1, he ended up missing 5 games with a shoulder injury, and 2, he got suspended. He ended up getting suspended for a half against Ole Miss, and Coach Orgeron said, quote, "Toliver broke a team rule, so he was suspended for our first half against Ole Miss. We had some other guys who didn't practice the way they should, and you have to practice hard to play." Seemingly there was an attitude problem with Toliver behind the scenes, and this was the start of some baggage for him. He still finished the 2016 season with 20 tackles and 1 pass deflection. 2017 was supposed to be his big year with White gone, and now he'd form a dynamic duo with another corner by the name of Dante Jackson. The two of them ended up becoming one of the best secondary duos in all of college football, and Toliver had his best season. He finished with 27 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 10 pass deflections, and 1 interception. One stat that really pops off the page is his lack of turnovers, but it didn't really matter. He had an unbelievable amount of talent, except there was some trouble on the horizon. He ended up declaring for the 2018 NFL Draft, but scouts were concerned. One said, quote, "He just wasn't accountable for a lot of things." Toliver would later admit that was the case, and this would lead him to not being selected despite all the talent. He did figure he'd be a mid-round pick at worst, but he said it was an awful night as rounds went on and his phone didn't ring. Now he went from a 5-star recruit to someone who'd have to earn their way onto a roster. He ended up signing with the Chicago Bears for under $100,000. But the Bears' investment would pay off as he quickly became one of the top undrafted free agents in the NFL. In 2018, he made 1 start with the Bears, finishing with 16 total tackles and 2 pass deflections. He was one of those guys that was fringely on the roster, but this was still huge for him as he had his foot in the door. He said he got a ton of advice on how to make the roster, and in 2 years, he'd play 30 games for the Bears. He'd make 29 combined tackles, 2 starts, and had 4 combined pass deflections. Unfortunately, this was not enough to keep him on the roster, as he was eventually cut by the Bears, and then he'd have to move on. In 2020, he signed with the Denver Broncos practice squad, but was elevated for 2 games. He didn't really do a whole lot in those games, but he was still in the NFL. After that, he went on to the Ravens, but he did not ever see the field for them, and now he's heading into his next step of his career. He recently got drafted into the XFL, and we will see how he will do there. The XFL is littered with former NFL players, and if he can find a way to ball out there, he might get an opportunity to play in the NFL again. Some would say Kevin Toliver is a complete bust, but in my opinion, he still did everything that was expected of him. When you're ranked as a top 10 recruit, you're expected to make it to the NFL. That's exactly what he did. He started some games in the league, and he still has time to make it. While he may not have lived up to all the expectations or become the next LSU great defensive back, he still had a good career with LSU, obviously found a way to play on Sundays, and he's still going strong. He had some ups and downs along the way, but I'll definitely be rooting for him and watching to see what happens to him in the XFL. But what do you guys think? If you're a Bears, LSU, or Toliver fan, what do you think of his career, and what do you think is next for him? Also be sure to let me know another 5-star or prodigy player I could take a look at in my next video. And before you go, don't forget to also leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about what happened to Sam Heward. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.